Hi, my name is Anna, and my bio is in progress of being updated. But essentially, I've been working on, relevant to this conference, I've been working on Terria.js and projects associated with Terria.js for the past 10 years. And overall, I've been working at the intersection of government and technology for 15 years, both in Romania, Eastern Europe, and Australia, and been jumping around between project management and product management. But that's another topic. So today, welcome. I'll be talking about a topic, or I want to open the conversation actually about a topic which, from my search, it hasn't been very popular in the open source conferences. And the reason, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that the open source conferences, for good reason, they focus on how do we solve a problem, what are the tools we can use to solve a particular problem, right? Technical or not. So the focus is on passion projects, which is completely understandable. Through the presentation today, I like to answer a few questions, which are actually one question, is around the use of these open source tools in organizations, either government or private organizations or research. And the reason for that is to essentially enhance or improve the uptake of open source tools in various organizations. And I can't stress enough, feels such a good segue from Phil's presentation just earlier on adopting those end-to-end processes within organizations using different open source tools. So the question for me, why would we enhance I know it's a stupid question and the wrong crowd to ask the question, but why would we do that? Why would we enhance the open source usage in any organization? So beyond the developer passion project. And how, if we are to do that? So today I've been, I'll take you through my thinking and hopefully trigger a conversation, and more than that, trigger what shall we do about it kind of plan. I really love planning, disclaimer. I really love planning because that's how you get SHIT done, essentially. Am I allowed? All right, so this is the outline. I won't go through it, but a little bit about ourselves. I promise it's going to be very short. If you've been to the Terria.js presentation done by our developers, you understand that we are about access, and access to technology and access to data through open source technology and open data. And we want to make sure that our goal is to simplify that access, make that complexity disappear. And it's not a solved problem for us, and we keep working on it every day. That's our mission. Our journey, we started back in 2014. Yes, we started with the national map as the first use case, but things have changed, and we moved on, and national map has moved on. We started with few key principles that I'll talk about in a second, so I won't go through them right now. But back in 2018, we moved on to experimenting again in the public, as we always did, around digital twins. And we experimented with some champions and champions in the government at that stage, in state government in Australia. And last year, we wanted to find out from organizations around Australia if they are ready for the uptake of digital twins in Geospatial. And we worked with some key organizations in renewables. We care a lot about that. In renewables and infrastructure/construction is not always construction is not always part of infrastructure. And we wanted to explore more from the adoption of digital twins in Australia, which, by the way, was a pioneer and I hope still is or maintains that status. And looking forward, we want to scale what we found working with those organizations, both in private and the public sector, and take that further by improving the way we develop the technology, engaging with the community. You heard from Lawrence early on that we are hiring a community manager. We really want to improve the way we do open source. And more than that, we want to create products for people who are not developers to create their own Terria maps or Terria digital twins. And next year, we're going to launch a new program that continues the learnings that we've done with the early adopter program and gives a chance to other organizations test and adopt digital twins. That's enough about us. I'm done. When I thought about this presentation, it's been a long time, and I've been talking to my team about this, and they said, we are too small. We're never gonna, we are too small, and this is like a big thing to take on. And I said, look, this is a 5+ year type of vision of, getting open source and bridging a gap between passion project to scale adoption. And I've been talking to Phil last night a lot about that. How do we do scale really, really well? And I had to go back in history to find out what are the examples in the open source at large, because geospatial is just one aspect of it, but what others have done in the open source community, not geospatial, that have done that scale, have learned how to do it, have learned how to sell the concept, and more than that, helped organizations adopt at scale. And obviously, you know the history, I won't go through that. But what you notice looking at that is that geospatial was a step behind at every stage, right? So when the maturity happened in the non-geospatial space and commercial interest kind of got into it, which is not a bad thing, geospatial, 5 years after. And I think it's a silver lining there, because there are a lot of lessons to learn from the mistakes or the things that didn't work in the open source at large community that we could apply in the geospatial space. And we could leapfrog in a way. And when I looked at that history, I thought, okay, we can actually, there are ways of adopting geospatial at scale in organizations, especially like government, and make it easier for them to understand the benefits, but also act on those. And, okay, how can we do it? I put these details here because maybe people will want to share presentations afterwards, so that's why it's a bit wordy. People will say this is a no-no in presentation, and that's fine, it's on purpose. Going back to the roots of open source in Australia and the lessons we learned, when we started back in 2014, if you think about the history, we were pretty early when the overall adoption of geospatial was upcoming. Australia was there. So we started with very, very simple design principles of providing a solution at that problem of government of having a lot of data, a lot of that being geospatial, but not being able to be used by the public at large. And these were the key principles that guided everything we did after that, and we definitely still believe in them and want to continue that work. But you're going to see some slides here that will hopefully you'll find funny. But when you start conversations about open source with different organizations, there is a maturity level in understanding what it can do. At the end of the day, no organization cares if you use open source or not. What they want to do is they want to solve a problem. You've heard this so many times, right? But there are situations, very good situations or examples, when people do care what they use because of growth. They want to grow, they want to innovate, and they don't want to stagnate. But sometimes they need a bit of help of convincing others. So in some situations, we put together slide packs to help them communicate. And these are examples of those slide packs. Again, they're not for you. They're to show you what happens in a conversation about open source in an organization. Okay, do you know how it works? It starts with simple questions like, do you know what it is? It's a code base. It's is it a product? There is a confusion between code base and product and services and features. There is so much mess in the understanding of open source in organizations. So we start with, okay, do you know what it is? Do you know how it works? Do you know that everything you use right now, it has some component that is derived from an open source library? And, do you know what the risks are when open source is, how can I put it very nicely, less supported, right? Do you know what the risks are? And we often go to examples that are prime examples, like risks or things that have happened recently that they heard about, right? So we talk about the risk of relying on open source as a passion project of someone rather than a paid commercial type of engagement, or unverified custodianship of popular projects. So them getting to inquire more about who is the custodian of this open source library, who is maintaining it, how many are they, et cetera, et cetera. And types of support that exist in the open source world. And you all know this, but a lot of the projects are based on love, right? And the love can disappear at some point in time, as you know. Donations, paid by coffees, etc. You know the drill. Institutional sponsorship. I can't stress enough how many libraries out there are partially funded by institutional sponsorships. And this is a narrative or explanation to research or NGO organizations that want to support open source and they don't know, they don't understand the examples around there and how it could be done. And also commercial revenue. Yes, it's a very honorable, okay pathway to combine with other things that are aligned to support an open source project. It's perfectly fine because, again, open source is made by humans and humans need to be paid. Otherwise, the love disappears, et cetera, et cetera. So explaining all those things takes time, but every time we did it, it was worth it, I think. And there were many examples around us over time that helped the narrative, helped the case, and there, right now it's trendy. Open source is used by legal companies or VC companies, open sourcing their documentation and templates for raising funds and so on, right? Microsoft buys GitHub, et cetera, et cetera. So the more examples of these commercial enterprises adopting the idea of and selling the idea of open source, the more it helps the case. There's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. Now, okay, so let's say you convince, or in your case, you convince someone or an organization that open source is good. You have to understand how do you take that further. I'll try and go quicker because I think I'll be running out of time soon. There are a lot of great, talks out there, but I found a really good one that helps with the narrative, and it's around discover, build, deploy, scale stages of implementing some technology. It doesn't really matter which one, if it's geospatial or not, in an organization. You can check it out. And what was very clear when, Alessio did this research and, had a lot of talks about it, that in the initial phases of discovery and build, open source are open source packages and technologies are greatly favored because it helps with experimentation, it helps understanding pros and cons between different packages, how you put them together, et cetera, et cetera. The moment a decision is made to deploy and scale, that's when things change because you have to speak with the C-suite. And the conversation completely changes, right? What's the return of investment? How am I going to get support, et cetera, et cetera. The business metrics matter. And in a nutshell, as a summary, the lessons we learned in our conversations over 10 years in trying to convince people of the advantages of open source. What we found is, maybe because of the type of organizations we worked with, mostly government and research, which have different values, they are in general very open to understand and use open source. There's no hostility around it, genuine hostility. But when it comes to deployment and stages of a particular implementation, those business requirements matter a lot, and they could make or break a case for open source, understandably so. So working with them to understand their requirements and help them make the case, coming from a place or, there is no hostility between, you don't like open source, you like open source. There's nothing of that. How can we help you make the case if you care about that? Thinking at implementations from a holistic point of view, right? You need a particular package or technology, but you need it in a particular context. You don't need just because you need a visualization or you need a back-end service or whatever. You need because it's part of an end-to-end thing. Helping them, another thing was helping them make the case in writing, so answering in writing to the questions that they would get from procurement, legal, finance, IT. They're all normal, and they don't exist just in government, they exist everywhere, as you know. Helping them write those documentation from a genuine open source view rather than, oh, my package is the best. No. If you need other packages that will fit that solution, we should champion those. And because without that help, it's hard for champions to produce, to trigger change. Now, the advantages, convincing people and helping them convince others in the organizations, the advantages that they agreed with and wanted to champion were around, cost efficiency, freedom to experiment, and the option or the possibility to grow and innovate and try new things and do more and be a leader in the domain that putting Australia on the map of, for example, Earth observations or other things that Australia has chosen to do and pioneer, or digital twins. Another thing that is usually overlooked was the value of training and understanding technology in-house, regardless of adopting open source or not at the end of the day, because that helps you get more fit, if I can say that. It helps you understand how the technology works. You don't rely so much on procurement, on contractors, even writing your procurement technical documents to get other contractors to do the job. So trialing and testing and failing at using open source technologies help you get fit in terms of understanding technology in general and making assertive assessments when you negotiate with different vendors, different packages, proprietary or not. So you don't have to go open source, but you will understand more. And obviously, regardless of what they're using, open source gives them, another option, a better option to use open standards that could be used in both open source and proprietary systems. So getting them more familiar with those helps them with adoption in general. Now, the challenges, and I can't stress them enough because they're really important. The challenges that people face when trying to adopt open source in organizations are, I like to focus on the three S's, but they're in general more. So it's scalability, security, and support. Security, okay, questions. When did you have your last pen test? What happened with the results? Can you show me your logs? Can you monitor? So these are just the beginning, right? They want to see, and on very good, good grounds, and I completely understand. They want to see that you are thinking about security, that when you implement open source, it's just because it's cool, it's actually standing up to security vulnerabilities and attacks and all of that. It's very, very top priority for them. Secondly is scalability. Well, okay, it works for the 3 members of my team, but I want to scale it to my entire company of 6,000 people. How are you going to do that? You have to have a plan. And there are other things, but support is, again, one very important, because people want to have the certainty that when things go wrong, when they need help explaining, training, etc., they can go to somewhere to get that help and support. No matter how much, it's not even about money. It's about, being certain that if something goes wrong, there is someone that they could call and help them fix the problem. It's as simple as that. And obviously, the compliance, the licensing, the IP, there is a big misunderstanding between licensing and confusion between IP of the code and licensing. People are because they are very, they've used licensing systems for so many years when it comes to IP requiring for an open source IP to be theirs, whereas they've been using licensing systems for many years successfully. It's a point of friction in the discussion. I think we have to do a better job explaining the difference between owning the IP and actually being in your interest that the IP is owned by the company building the open source or the group or the team or whatever, than you owning the IP versus the very good license that you would have. That's a conversation that needs a lot of hours. And obviously, accountability, who's, again, custodianship of the code, integrations, legacy, etc. All of these things that you've heard many, many times. Okay, but, if organizations are convinced that they want to trial and they want to test and they eventually scale open source, what they can do, what can they do to make that happen, to grow, to innovate? And from their perspective, there is work to be done on their side. Like it's for free, but it's not for free, right? There is effort. Effort costs money, costs people, etc. And they need to have a framework. They need to understand first of all, how open source works, and how would that apply in their organization. In that framework, they need to address the risk. So what would the security risk look like, and how is that managed? What would the support risk look like? How is that managed, et cetera, et cetera. They building the internal expertise, like I said, with training and making people experiment on purpose and failing with different open source technology. It's good. It's not wasted time and it's not wasted money. It's good, regardless if they adopt it or not. Starting small and iterating with small projects in line with the prototyping, engaging with the open source community, especially in terms of or with the champions of particular libraries that they need in their workflows or their prototypes, and supporting the open source community through projects, simple projects, from sponsoring projects, events, training, actual solution developments. Anything helps the overall community to thrive and be stronger. The stronger the open source community, the better results the businesses get. Now, in terms of the open source community, which we are part of, We need to get better of explaining and improving the security practices, management of vulnerabilities, being transparent about them, doing regular checks and making those checks results transparently available to everyone. So you basically you're preempting the questions that you will forever get around the security and how do you manage, what plan do you have, what's the vision, et cetera, et cetera. Clear governance models around the libraries that everybody is in charge of or contributing to, making sure those, again, governance models and the custodianship and I guess the continuity of those libraries and maintaining those, it's clear to everyone and it's transparent. Support, making sure you work with the community to exist support networks in either private, developers or traders, but also companies. QGIS did an amazing job with that, and all respect for the network that they've created and the way they took that forward. And obviously helping with the compliance, developing business-focused documentation that will actually help people adopt and internally champion open source. And obviously not staying shy of establishing, if possible, commercial models for running, maintaining open source models, but also building projects on top of that. From that commercial, I guess, revenue, portions of that would be reinvested in the open source. I believe in that model. I think there's nothing wrong with that. And I believe that that's a sustainable pathway that makes both sides or organizations, but also open source community more sustainable and engage on actual projects and needs. And it takes far more than a village or even a community, because every library, if you think about it, or every open source package would have their own community. But it's actually thinking holistically about if you put yourself in the shoes of an organization, they want to solve problems, if you think about data, in production, hosting, maintenance, data. And they have to think about packages here and there, about WebGIS and databases and cloud and 2D and 3D analytics, et cetera, et cetera. Where do they start, right? If I was an organization wanting to adopt open source, where do I go? Do I go on Twitter and, do I go on Twitter and ask, does anybody know a PostGIS developer or a QGIS? Where do I go? Where do I go to contact someone to help me? And planning, okay? One last slide. Okay, what can be done between now and the next FOSS4G? I promise I want to give this presentation 1 year later with what has been done by us as a community. And first of all, there is a need for an organizational structure to, I guess, take this vision and make it a reality, bridging the gap between open source and organizations adopting open source, articulating the vision, using that structure, but also creating a go-to page where people can start their journey in understanding and talking to champions in the open source. In practice, through that organization, it could be any organization, but FOSS4G is one, open source geo is one example. They could start, the leadership could start engaging people working on whole solutions rather than just PostGIS, just QGIS, just this, just that. Be altruistic in our approach. If we hear that a problem is better solved with QGIS or Postgres or this or that, we should make sure that organizations are going to the right people to solve their problem, regardless of your passion project. It doesn't really matter, because it's not going to be in their advantage trying to sell your passion project because you think yours is better. Always putting ourselves in their shoes, starting with their customer experience. If I want to start my journey in open source, where do I go? Where do I start? And we could start with a map, right? since this is a geospatial community, maybe starting with a map showing the location of open source providers, it's a good start. So I like to start a conversation about that, and if you are interested in this completely voluntary project, come and talk to me, and maybe we can make a change by then. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. I let that go over for rather selfish reasons. I'm enamored with what you just presented, so sign me up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any one last question? We're already over time, but if anyone has a question.
Apology.
Yes, one question in the back.
Just wanted to get maybe your opinion on open source projects and the power that gets vested into project owners. And I can think of a particular example over the last couple of years where a license model got changed and a lot of people got upset because the ground rules had changed for that open source project. Do you think that that has an impact on the uptake of open source?
Of course. But so a recent example is Cesium got bought by Bentley, and everybody is in a state of wait and see what's going to happen, right? Cesium is we use it as well, is a very popular 3D visualization engine. And it got bought by a big commercial company called Bentley. I thought long and strong about that, long before it got acquired, because these things happen, and it's fine, it's okay. And I thought about Mapbox, right? Mapbox got, changed their licensing agreements, licensing conditions, and it was an uproar. But the community survived. You know very well that it's MapLibre, and it's very, a version of it. It got continued, and it got supported by the community and is thriving. There is no problem. Any code version before the license changes remains as it was, open. And therefore is not a black box that you kick down the road. It's actually a living thing that people can take on and reuse it in the same way that it has been used. I think the key there is there a custodianship plan? Is there a structure around that code base that could take that further to the new version of it that is open source in the same way that it has been? And that's why I'm so keen about what can we do to make it easier to create those structures and create those pathways for mitigating those risks. Yes, it's a risk, absolutely, but we can do something about it. I hope that answers your question.